Thank you very much, Joe. And as you mentioned, this is Education for Good Global Governance. In the past, some of you may have seen me present on education for refugees. What we're looking at this time is, instead of educating the refugees, we're educating the societies in how they need to deal with refugees and other global crises. So education plays a crucial role in allowing global citizens to make informed choices when it comes to the selection of their representatives, but also of the policy platforms that are pursued. So this panel focuses on the importance of dissemination of principles of good governance in the face of contemporary challenges, such as climate change and the humanitarian crisis of refugees and forced migration. So we're going to address the responsibilities to others. And we're going to start with Professor Jun Arima, who is online and currently serves as the president of IAFOR. He is formerly Director General of the Japan External Trade Organization and Special Advisor on Global Environmental Affairs to the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry. He served as Japan's chief negotiator for the ad hoc working group for future commitments under the Kyoto Protocol in the UN Convention on Climate Change, 14, 15, and 16. And since 2015, he's been a professor at the University of Tokyo, Japan, where he teaches energy security, international energy governance, and environmental policies in the Graduate School of Public Policy. June will be followed by Dr. Shin, who serves as the Assistant Director General and Head of the Investment and Policy Solutions Division at the Global Green Growth Institute in South Korea, a leading international organization dedicated to promoting green growth and climate resilience. He leads global programs in areas such as green hydrogen, low carbon transport, and the circular economy, which have the potential to mobilize from 500 million to over $1 billion US. Currently, he's establishing a blended finance facility that integrates public and private capital. We will then have Professor Yukari Ando, professor at the University of Toyama, Japan. Her field of research centers around international refugee law and international human rights law. She's also served as program advisor in the Cabinet Office of Japan, during which she was involved in the general election in Sudan in 2010 and the Southern Sudan referendum in 2011 as an international observer. And then finally, I will return and I will talk about the obligations of formerly homogenous societies to refugees and forced migrants. So without further ado, June, are you ready?
Yes, Brandon, thank you very much for kind introduction, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Arima, and it's a pity that I cannot participate in person in this very much exciting panel, since I'm now in California in the United States. So, and then this session is going to talk about the importance of good global governance. And as introduced by Brandon, I have been serving as a negotiator of the global climate change regime. So therefore, it is very much germane for me to touch upon the global climate change issues from the viewpoint of good governance. And climate change is a global issue and a common threat facing humanity, and in particular, small economies and vulnerable countries, which contribute little to greenhouse gas emissions, are disproportionately affected by global warming. So this is why global efforts at the United Nations are very much important. But at the same time, it is not easy to internalize the problems of global warming, which is typical negative externalities. The benefits of each country's mitigation efforts are shared globally, while the economic cost of mitigation are borne by each country. So this creates the perfect recipe for prisoner's dilemma. I just said I'm now in the United States, and as you know, the President Trump has announced that US would withdraw from the Paris Agreement. And this is a typical example of the prisoner's dilemma. And difficulty is that in order to achieve the 1.5 degrees Celsius goals which is regarded as global goal, we must achieve a major energy transition at an unprecedented speed on the global level. And looking back at the past energy transition, technology and economic advantage were the key drivers. Currently, the energy transition is particularly driven by public policies. And previous energy transition unfolded over the course of century or more, a very long term. And they did not wholly displace the incumbent technology or incumbent energy systems. But today, today's debate on energy transition is aiming at to be unfolded in little more than a quarter century and not be additive. In other words, it is intended to be displace completely the incumbent energy systems. However, if we are to rapidly raise our level of ambition, the final consumer must be prepared to bear the increased cost of preventing global warming. And the outcome of European Parliament election last June and the US presidential election last November shows that the general public does not necessarily support policies raising their energy expenses day to day. And policies that do not have the support from the public and industry are not sustainable politically and economically. So this is true for both developed and developing countries. In this regard, the role of education is very important in improving the willingness of the public to pay. And through education, it is necessary to promote understanding of the general public about the need to change people's energy consumption patterns to prevent global warming, and the fact that energy conversion or energy transition will incur cost. It is not free of charge. So we need to be ready to bear the cost for energy transition. Otherwise, just a hollow promise that energy transition can happen without any additional cost, that is totally a lie. So we should not fool ourselves. Having said that, we have to also acknowledge the fact that we are facing four major hurdles for energy transition. Number one, owing largely to disruptions caused by Ukraine war and also Hamas-Israel war, energy security has become a top priority again in many countries. Number two, today's world economy still depends on hydrocarbon for over 80% of its energy supply. And four essential pillars of modern civilization, namely cement, steel, plastics, and ammonia for fertilizer, each of which is heavily dependent on the existing energy system, namely fossil fuels. Number three, priority on climate action and definition of the energy transition is different between global north and global south. In global north, energy transition means shifting away from fossil fuels to renewables. But in global south, in particular African continent, the energy transition means transition from traditional biomass to modern electricity supply, whether or not it is renewable or coal or fossil fuels or whatever. And number four, supply-demand crunch of critical minerals such as copper, lithium, and then the rare earth, cobalt, and so forth would become increasingly tight in coming decades because of the larger demand for clean technologies. And we also need to acknowledge that it is quite important to drastically increase financial assistance to developing countries, which will account for the majority of future energy demand and greenhouse gas emissions. I attended COP29 last November, and COP29 revealed a deep rift between developed and developing countries over the new financial assistance goals. And frankly speaking, developing countries are very much frustrated with the $300 billion, which is agreed as the new financial goals, financial flow from developed to developing countries. In addition, these $300 billion achievability of this financial target is also questionable because of the exit of the United States from Paris Accord. And also European countries are increasingly preoccupied with defense and also national security rather than climate change. So if financial flow to developing countries will be further delayed, then that could discourage ambitious actions by developing countries. So all in all, as the international political and economic situation becomes more chaotic, the outcome of international efforts to prevent global warming will not allow any optimism. But having said that, still, we need to face a reality and we need to gradually increase the people's awareness about climate change and people's awareness about the challenge of the next transition. Without that, any ambitious narrative will be in vain. So I will stop here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jun. And next.
My slide. Can you go to my slide? Okay. So next, yes. Okay. So let me introduce myself. As introduced by Professor Howe, I spent like 14 years in Ministry of Finance, Korean government, as a finance specialist, and then following the Ministry of Finance, I spent 14 years Asian Development Bank, Development Finance. After that, I moved to Green Technology Center, and then now currently working in UN agency, Global Green Growth Institute as a climate finance. So my life is still related to finance. So taking this opportunity, I really appreciate Dr. Joseph, and then also very much good discussion with Amir, and then IAFOR colleague for inviting me to this amazing, important conference. And then if you see the slide one, I read this one from the newspaper. Glacier are vital to our planet health, serving a fresh water reserve for billion people to survive, and helping stabilize local and global ecosystems. As shown here, up and down, the color gray in Aletsch Glacier in Alps. They are glacier is melting. This is really serious now. One example, we need to take a look at this. Next slide, because of this rapid glacial retreat is a clear indicator of climate change and poses immediate challenges for water suppliers, agriculture, energy production, and disaster risk. By taking coordinated actions such as reducing greenhouse gas emissions and investing in climate adaptation, the global community can better protect our planet. Who we are, GGGI. Yes. The GGI is an intergovernment international agency organization. We have more than 800 people, staff working in 45 overseas offices. We are working with 80 countries, including 50, and then UK, Qatar also. This is also very important, our member countries. GGI was found under the agreement of establishment Global Green Growth Institute in 2012 during the UN conference on sustainable development. We call this one Rio Plus 20. If you see a key achievement, it's very difficult to read this one. Most of the past 6 years, we secured 10 billion US dollars clean investment commitment. On the right side tab, saying that we have supported development of more than 300 green growth policy regulatory framework. And we also built a climate resilience for 52 million people and create 390,000 green jobs. Actually, we are now achieving 1 to 25 leverage ratio. For instance, if you're using $1, with $1 spent, secure mobilization of approximately more than $25 in coming month. Just last year, actually, we are not speed up now, and then with more like strong commitment and then support different donor countries, we facilitate 4.2 billion US dollar only last year investment commitment for infrastructure financing and sustainable financing. We are very much support development 138 policy, of which 17 policy was adopted as important green growth policies. So what are we doing to contribute to net zero target? Looks like a very confusing, but we can say that, 196 countries plus EU, 197 parties, they ratified or joined the Paris Agreement, committing, develop, update their nationally determined contribution. This is really important target. Everybody now bind it to save our planet. What is NDC implementation? If you see here, more or less 5 or 6 components, very important major activities. First, sectoral and thematic policy regulatory framework program, identification of climate technology, these assessment matching together between supply and demand, and then development of sustainable infrastructure project with climate financing. And still, we are looking for a new initiative, MIBCO2 tracking system and the AI-based knowledge management system. Again, we need a strong participation of a private sector. The government, public sector resources is not enough to cover all climate financing. We started now CSR philanthropic and the strong collaboration with the private sector investors. And this is too much complicated, but I can say that if you see on the left side, this is more or less how we are supporting to meet their NDCs. And this one is like a donor country to provide these kinds of programs. Korea, Qatar, Finland, and Luxembourg, etc., etc. On the right side is like also an example where we are working. Green hydrogen, methane flaring gas, floating solar. Absolutely, Asian Development Bank, World Bank, IMF is also very much, IFC is very happy to work with us because we are one of the key climate technology, climate export worldwide. So this one example, first sovereign sustainability bond in Paris, 3.2 billion US dollars in 2021. And then the first ever on the right side, floating solar project, ever 600 megawatt. And then also we are working on different kind of infrastructure, energy, transport, plastic with the World Economic Forum and different partner donors. My last slide. How to enhance network with academic circle. I think this is my favorite slide because I want to show something like how can we work with you through IAFOR and also Qatar, our friend Amir is also here. We are currently working with LUCCC, list development country university for climate change. And then the huge demand from countries, eldest country in Africa, Asia. We are not connected with this older country. As I mentioned, we are working with 80 countries. And we are looking for some premium university who can be part of our drive. And once we have a strong elite side and then premium university, actually we are looking for some resources from our side or ODA resources and then strong participation from funds. Why we need this kind of exercise? Because we have many projects across 5 regions, 80 countries. But the issue is that there's strong demand from students, researchers in this country, sometimes very much express huge interest from our premium university. We are very happy to be our platform to invite all of you. I think it is going to be very important topic, but happy to further discuss. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Doctor. You were perfectly on time. Brilliant. So next we have Professor Ando.
Thank you very much. And can you pass? Thank you. So, yeah, probably. Okay. Okay, so today I would like to talk about refugee and who is not a refugee. By the way, thank you very much for distinguished organizer and participants. Such a beautiful day. You stay here. We are very appreciated. So today I would like to talk about definition of refugee and no environmental refugee as such, and development of international human rights law. At the introduction, education is a hope for the future generation, and ignorance is sometimes not innocent. From the perspective of international human rights law and international refugee law, I would like to emphasize who is a refugee and who is not a refugee so far. Every year, 20th of June is the World Refugee Day. The United Nations General Assembly officially designated International Day in December 2000. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, published the global trends before the World Refugee Day every year. And global trends last year says the increase to 117.3 million at the end of 2023 constitute a rise of 8% or 8.8 million people compared to the end of 2022, and continue a series of year-on-year increases over the last 12 years. So increasing last 12 years, which is enormous number. And now I would like to emphasize who is a refugee. Actually, the Refugee Convention says race, religion, nationality, membership of particular social group, political opinion. If they are not met one of the 5 reasons, at least one of the 5 reasons, they are not recognized as a refugee. And I would like to ask you the questions. Environmental refugee can be met under one of 5: race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion. Actually, under the international refugee law, there is no environmental refugee as such so far. Because environmental refugee is strictly interpreted no refugee under the definition. But there are minor opinion. No, they can be met under the membership of particular social group or nationality. But it's minor. So major opinion says no, there is no environmental refugee as such so far. Then who can be protected? I mean, environmental refugee, we can ignore? No, we cannot ignore. Then definition of complementary protection is very, very important. Complementary protection as complementary or subsidiary protection, they are not refugee, but person in need of protection, in need of international protection. they can be protected under the complementary protection. And Japan created the system of complementary protection 2023, 2 years ago. And they have the supplementary resolution under the House of Council Committee of Legal Affairs. They said, endeavor to ensure the protection of not only conflicted displaced persons, because under the debate of the creating the new act, they are really focusing on the Ukraine, some people from Ukraine, but not only conflict displaced persons, but also those who are truly in need of protection, such as those who are likely to be subjected to arbitrary deprivation of life, or torture, or cruel treatment or punishment, or to enforce disappearance if they return to their country of nationality or other countries. So that is exactly who can be in need of international protection. And this notion comes from development of international human rights law. International human rights norms really develops day by day. In Japan too. Particularly, the principle of non-refoulement, it's originally from French word. It appears firstly Refugee Convention. Under 33 of paragraph 1 says, state parties shall not expel or repatriate refugees by any means to the borders of territories where their life or freedom may be threatened because of their race, religion, nationality, or membership of particular social group or political opinion. But as I said earlier, environmental refugee is not recognized under Refugee Convention. Then what comes next? International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, ICCPR, International Human Rights Law, plays significant role to protect people in need of protection. Because Article 6, paragraph 1 says, every human being has an inherent right to life. The right is protected by law. No one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his life. And Article 7 says, no torture, no cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment. So if somebody is sent back to their country of origin, if they are faced arbitrarily deprived of their life or inhuman treatment, they are protected by the principle of non-refoulement by the ICCPR. So that is very important. Why is the principle of non-refoulement important? The greatest fear of displacement persons are sent back to their country of origin, country of nationality. Once they are sent back, there is no way to get them back. Then there might be really serious harm, damage, the arbitrary deprivation of life. So that is very important. And environmental displacement is clearly protected by the ICCPR. And Human Rights Committee is a committee of the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights. And they said 2020, they took a case, possibly application of the non-refoulement principle because deportation to a place where climate change is thinking violence and right to life. But this case actually, they not recognize a violation because of the Kiribati government can do helping. But in theory, the principle of non-refoulement is applying for the climate change displacement. Oops. So this is a conceptual diagram which I made. Who can be protected by the international human rights? Environmental displacement is protected because arbitrary deprivation of life or inhuman treatment. And due to the time constraint, I skip. So conclusions. International human rights norms, particularly the application of non-human, is very important. And application of the principle is expanding day by day because of the climate change, global warming, and the June mentioned climate change, global warming is needed the public awareness, and mentioned the glacier threatening 2 billion people. So that is interconnected for the displacement persons because of they are facing the serious harm or damage. So please remember, when the 20th of June comes, the World Refugee Day, please think about refugee and climate change displacement person. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Ando. Also keeping wonderfully well to time. So I will probably now violate that principle and go over time and embarrass myself. But I will try also to keep to time, in which case, can I have my slides? No, just took a while. Okay, there we go. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about refugees and migration and the reception that they get in Northeast Asian countries, especially the challenges of multiculturalism for good governance prescription at both the domestic and international level. Domestically, in this region, of course, in diluting the supposed homogeneity of nation states, it dramatically undermines an argument for an identity of interests between the state and its citizens. It implies a required shift in the focus of governance from efficacy or efficiency for aggregate measurement of the people to a human-centered provision of safe havens for vulnerable individuals and groups. Internationally, of course, it's inextricably linked with refugee and migration flows. And as Professor Ando has already pointed out, this has been massively increasing challenge to global governance for both of these categories. So these challenges are exacerbated in Northeast Asia because of three intersecting factors. First, national security governance prioritization. Second, developmentalism or econophoria, where the solution of all governance problems is sought through economic development. And third, a self-conceptualization as ethnically homogenous societies, despite there being 2.5 million foreigners in Korea, about 5% of the population, and 2.7 million in Japan, 2.2% of the population. Nevertheless, Korea and Japan do aspire to be recognized as normative powers, good governors, good global citizens that adhere to international humanitarian conventions and indeed act as norm entrepreneurs, as we've already seen with Global Green Growth Institute in Korea. In 2013, Korea did become the first state in the region to enact a domestic refugee law. Yay, Korea. But still only accepts around 4% of refugees. So not great. Japan, even after the 2023 Immigration Act, only slightly better rate than Korea. So these are particularly low rates when we take in the context of both countries' ability to support refugees and their normative policy aspirations. Japan, of course, famously with human security. In addition, the conditions for migrant workers, foreign brides, forced migrants or non-forced migrants in both countries leave much to be desired. Okay, took a while. I think I'm going to skip this slide actually because, and this one, because we've already talked about that quite extensively, and I will try to stay on time. So different types of migrants also generate different conflicts of interests. On the one hand, from a pragmatic perspective, there's a preference for migrants who offer the greatest potential benefit to the country that they're migrating to, while posing the lowest potential threats or costs. On the other hand, discrimination between groups on whatever grounds, geographic origin, ethnicity, religion, potential for contribution, is problematic from the principle of being a good global citizen and the universal entitlement rights of vulnerable individuals and groups. So in terms of types of immigrant, as you can see in this table, there are lots of trade-offs in terms of benefits and costs as seen by recipient countries. There's benefit, certainly, I think, in this region to be had from an influx of new blood. But in picking and choosing who should be admitted, especially in the case of refugees, violates the international normative principles that Professor Ando was just highlighting. And it's a compromise that Northeast Asian governments seem willing to make. Perhaps most importantly, geographic and ethnic origin is often used as a rule of thumb for determining whether someone gets to stay or not. So East Asian, well, advantages of East Asians is they can more readily be assimilated. Western, well, you assume that they're going to come with money or adapt to high-skilled jobs. Global other, well, tend not to be treated terribly well in these countries. So, to sum up, why things must change in Northeast Asia? Well, first of all, a multi-ethnic Northeast Asia is inevitable. Secondly, new blood in the form of foreign brides who become the mothers of multi-ethnic and potentially bicultural children. And we see, as I mentioned, a preference for Northeast Asian or Southeast Asian brides whose children could potentially be passed off as being of the blood. Well, that's great. It makes it easier to pursue your assimilation policies, but it's problematic when those sources of immigration are drying up. There's a limit to how many Northeast Asian or Southeast Asian brides and children you can bring into the country. So the dramatically declining numbers of those actually of the blood, and Korea has been a preferred destination for Chinese Koreans, North Korean refugees, etc. So these policies could be counterproductive. And of course, female marriage migrants represent another category, like refugees, whose human security is seriously undermined in Northeast Asia, rather than being protected and promoted. Don't have time to talk about that, but it caused a diplomatic issue between Korea and Vietnam for that very reason. Even immigrants and refugees who are of the blood, so the Chinese Koreans, the North Korean refugees in Korea, Peruvians in Japan, report discrimination and challenges in integrating into Northeast Asian societies. So rather than focusing, as both societies and both governments currently do, on how best to educate and train foreigners to live in South Korea or Japan and become part of these societies, it might be better to expend some of these resources on educating the societies about the benefits of transitioning from ethno-homogeneity towards true multiculturalism. This should include not only increasing awareness of the direct need for immigration, but also awareness of the indirect benefits of multiculturalism, in that it's only through mixing and blending that new is created. So it reinvigorates societies as a whole. Just look at how British food has been reinvigorated by migrant cultures. Thank goodness. So there needs to be an end to discrimination in terms of selection and acceptance of migrants and refugees. The purpose of anti-discrimination is to overcome the linkage between low status and accompanying stigma with ethnicity, race, and national origins. Current arrangements create a permanent class of underprivileged immigrants, which is an obvious source of social conflict, a threat to cohesion, and indeed it can often be securitized by unscrupulous political entrepreneurs. So immigrants, refugees need a career path, a path to citizenship, easier access to education, which is what I usually bang on about, but I thought I'd expand the discussion this time. Okay, I think I'm just in time. So thank you very much. So now I believe we have sufficient time to welcome a few questions from the audience or comments from the audience. If you could identify yourself and also to whom you would like to address the question, that would be great. If you want to address it to the whole panel, also acceptable, but please.
I come from Australia, and we're really proud of our multiculturalism because we have immigrants from many countries. There seems to be, I mean, I'm an immigrant myself, actually, coming from the Netherlands. And when we came, we had, in the 1960s, we were told we had to assimilate. So we assimilated, we learned the language very quickly, and we tried to be Australian as much as we could, from the word go, actually. In fact, some of the Dutch even changed their names. So if you were Jan, you became a John, and I'm a Johannes. I should be a John, but my brother was Jan, and so they called him John, so I stuck with Hans. And so I've always been a bit of a foreigner over there, but that's okay. But I think the challenge that I found in our nation was that many immigrant groups would take the conflicts that they had in their home countries with them to Australia. So I never knew about the Macedonians or the Croatians or the Serbians, but for some reason they had their own football clubs, and when they had played football against each other, it wasn't just a football match, it was the tensions that they brought from those countries into Australia, and they would have it out on the football match, which is good because there was no fighting, but nevertheless, what we found is that often the trials and tribulations and wars of the past were brought into the country, which continued to create tension with these groups, and I think that's always been a problem.
Well, thank you very much for raising the case of Australia, because this gives me an excuse to also reference something in Australia, which is something that Mick Keelty, the former federal police commissioner in Australia, referred to, and it links all of our presentations, because he talked about the dangers, the greatest security threat to Australia was actually climate change, but not because of all the Australians dying from skin cancer. It was actually because of the Pacific Islanders and Chinese who were fleeing their country and migrating to Australia, where they had formed vicious gangs in Australian cities and undermine Australian security. Now, ignoring the overt racial connotations of this, I think it does speak to some of the securitization of refugees and migrants, especially environmental migrants, in recipient countries, even those that are already multicultural.
Hello, I'm James Kausiker from JICA. In my research project recently, I was interviewing some people who received our JICA scholarships. One of the kind of surprising things that they said, they came to Japan and they said, oh, I love Japan and how diverse it was. My classroom had 20 different nationalities in it. So I think this is kind of something which is changing even here. You know, it was a really surprising result for me because, of course, Japan has this image of being very homogenous. And they all really loved it, and it was viewed as quite a positive outcome. So my question to you would be, how would each of you as panelists go about promoting the benefits of multiculturalism in a society which is sometimes kind of resistant to it?
Well, again, this might be aimed at me, but while the other panelists are thinking how they want to answer it, in Korea, we also have KOICA programs, very similar results, including my university, where my department is 80% international students. Now, it's not all because of the KOICA students, but yes, it's very diverse. And I think this is part of the happy coincidence going forward, that there's a recognition Korean and Japanese universities, because of the demographic time bombs, have to become multicultural. They have to accept international students. They have to make it easier for international students to come. But also, of course, there's a greater need, especially for refugees, especially for students from developing countries. So I think education is definitely one of the ways, both to change the host country's perception, because certainly the Korean students in my classes benefit greatly from being exposed to the 40 different nationalities we have in our department at the moment. So it certainly helps, I think, but also the other direction as well. And maybe through education, the different Balkan nations can come together in Australia as well. But Professor Ando, maybe.
Thank you for the important questions.
I think Professor Arima also wants to say something.
Yeah, but you know, you could speak first, then I will follow.
Okay, thank you. As I teaching at the university in Japan, a lot of Japanese students would like to talk with international students. However, international student and Japanese student are parallel, unfortunately. And once I created the class, makeup class actually, because makeup class, I can do anything. Makeup class, and I intentionally created the international student and Japanese students need to talk together. And then they are very happy because they didn't have the opportunity to have such environment. So if we can set up the environment as such, probably it can be more expanding the multiculturalism.
Okay, Jin.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm teaching at graduate school of public policy of University of Tokyo, and my department GRASP is one of the most important internationalized faculty in the University of Tokyo. About 50% of the total students are coming from overseas, and I'm giving my lecture in English. And 90% of my students are coming from overseas and from various nationalities. And some of them are JICA, students, and some of them are IMF and World Bank students. So very much multicultural. But as my previous speaker said, not necessarily Japanese students and foreign students are mixing up. So foreign students are very much easy to mix up. but Japanese students in particular, those who are grown up in Japan, do not mix up with foreign students. And there are sometimes, the very much outspoken Japanese students, but they are quite often returnee from overseas. So therefore, I think we need to encourage Japanese students, for example, to study abroad, to get the double degree. Our university has MOU with many, many international universities. So therefore, we are encouraging students to go to other country. For example, we have Campus Asia, where we can get students can get degree from University of Tokyo and Beijing University and Seoul University. So that kind of multicultural environment, multicultural experience is to be strongly promoted. Having said that, the case of University of Tokyo or our graduate school is not the typical case for Japanese society. Looking at Japanese society as a whole, still largely homogeneous society compared with other countries like the UK or Australia.
Maybe I can add some very brief from my side. My office, 850 people from different 70 nationality because international organization. But I'm also a member of International Cooperation Development Committee under the Prime Minister's Office, Korean government. And the biggest budget is going to education capacity building, humanitarian ODA. So I found that many universities, they are also using access to ODA, invite a kind of sponsorship, many different kinds countries, Nepal and Sri Lanka, then Nigeria and Ecuador. So I think this is a usual trend now. We are trying to increase more ODA resources, huge amount of money. Good thing is that IAFOR, this is very good platform, and invite the professors start working on this kind of opportunity, take the money and ensure a more strong network. I think it is going to be another opportunity for IAFOR. Thank you.
Thank you for that. My name is Cindy Bintahal. I'm from the University of Queensland in Australia. I'm also the Education Director with the Academy of the Social Sciences in Australia. And this topic is very much what my HDR research is about, international mindedness. I've spent more than 20 years as a school leader in Canada, Australia, in national schools, and internationally for almost 10 years in Southeast Asia. And working in international schools, it's quite easy to have lots of different cultures assimilate, was my finding. And on a national level, and being back in Australia, one of the biggest challenges is the disharmony in our society. We want to encourage migration, we have to encourage migration, but then there is some significant disharmony. And I was speaking with a researcher from Denmark recently who was advocating about the social cohesion and how good things were, but then I asked him about their multicultural and migration policies and how that compares, and he agreed it was quite monocultural. And I guess a civic inquiry into civic education in Australia has just been conducted, and I guess this question of mine to the panel, with me being very much a primary high school teacher who keeps a hand in academia and research, debating and civil discourse has come out as absolutely crucial, and that's my work with the Academy of the Social Sciences. What are your thoughts on that? And how can we, of course, we're trying to get that into our schools in Australia through the work we're doing with the Academy. What are your thoughts on that also as part of teaching and learning in an academic arena?
Does anyone else want to go first on that one, or B again? Okay. Yeah, I think that Korea is an interesting case study for this because until about 20 years ago, there was no debate in Korea. Debating was not taught as a subject. There were no debate clubs or societies. The first one in the country was set up at Ewha Women's University, of course, always a pioneer. And they're the most successful debate club in Northeast Asia. often the regional champions. And I'm their advisor. But what has really taken off in Korea is high school debating. And so much so that Korea always had lots and lots of hagwons, cram schools that teach English and increasingly teach Chinese. But there's been a tremendous growth in cram schools teaching debate. And all of the international schools have very strong high school debate teams. The national high school debate team was just placed very well in the global competitions. So I think this is vital. Korea also has a long tradition of civic education as well. Now, normally that is taught as part of a curriculum. It started off as anti-communist. So South Korea, I'm talking about, of course. North Korea also has a strong tradition of civic education, being anti-South Korea. But this is part of the society. The Korea is the most educated, maybe most over-educated country in the world. They spend more per capita on education than any other country. But this is also part of the government mission, and always has been. A lot is spent on unification education. What will it mean to unify, as well as the civic responsibility that it's usually seen as something of a very conservative, maybe even authoritarian approach to education, to teach civic virtue. Certainly an Asian values interpretation, maybe. But I think there's a growing awareness that it has a very important role to play within liberal democracies as well. Anyone else? Okay, 1 minute left for a very short question, if anyone has one. I'll try and keep any answers short too. Okay.
Hello. It's a quick question, and it relates to refugees across the globe, and there's been a lot of talk about that. I'm really interested in the role of trauma and education and refugees. So if you could speak a little bit about that, because everybody has a story, and it's not always a great one, or multiple stories.
Thank you very much. Very important questions. Actually, a lot of refugee asylum seeker has trauma. And if decision maker do not know anything about that, they cannot decide properly. So decision makers training, education is very, very important. So that is a really crucial role, who can be decided refugee or not. And psychologically, mentally, very, very mixed. I cannot really explain, but they're psychologically, mentally, very, very difficult situation. So we need to know that. Otherwise, we cannot decide properly. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I think that feeds back into the idea that we need to educate the educators and educate the societies rather than only focusing on educating the refugees themselves. It's one of the main, trauma is one of the main barriers faced by refugees in gaining education at all levels. So, thank you all very much, and thank you to my wonderful panelists.